The lights in Madison Square Garden still hadn't cooled when the microphones swarmed him. Sweat was still running down his arms, his chest heaving from the knockout he had delivered minutes earlier. But the young champion stood tall in the center of the press circle, a towel draped across his shoulders like a cape. Reporters pushed forward, flashbulbs strobing against his grin. He loved this part, the crowd of voices, the chaos of questions. It was fuel, more intoxicating than the victory itself. One of the journalists shouted about his future opponents, another about endorsements, and then someone, half joking, asked about the old masters. The young man laughed straight into the nearest camera. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was the laugh of someone certain the world belonged to him. "Old masters," he repeated, adjusting the towel as though it were a crown. "You mean like Chuck Norris?" The room shifted. A couple of the younger reporters snickered. One even rolled his eyes as though the name itself was a relic. The champion seized on it. His grin widened, and he spoke louder, so every lens caught it. "Chuck Norris can teach Hollywood actors how to throw a punch. But in a real ring? Against someone like me?" He shook his head, mocking disbelief. "He wouldn't last a minute. I'd run right through him." Laughter broke from the front rows. Some of it nervous, some of it genuine. The clip-hungry journalists leaned forward, sensing a headline forming. But not everyone was smiling. Toward the back of the scrum, two older writers stiffened, their pens frozen above their notepads. To them, the name wasn't a meme or a punchline. It carried weight. One of them, his voice gravelly with decades of press rooms, spoke up over the laughter. "Are you serious?" The young champion turned his head sharply toward the voice, still grinning, eyes glinting with the rush of the spotlight. "Serious?" He raised his arms, as if the answer were self-evident. "I'll prove it anytime, anywhere. Bring him here, and I'll show the world how fast legends fall." The words landed differently. The laughter fractured. Some chuckled louder, eager to keep the mood light, but others felt a chill. The sound carried beyond the room, out into the broadcast feed, into living rooms, into phones glowing across the country. The champion wasn't done. He leaned toward the microphones, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel intimate, dangerous. 5 minutes. 1 round. That's all I'd need. He wouldn't touch me. He looked into a camera as though Norris himself might be watching on the other side. "And I'm ready whenever he is." The press conference spiraled. Questions piled in. How real was the challenge? Would he accept an exhibition? What did he mean by legends fall? The young man batted them away with more smirks, more bravado. Every sentence seemed crafted for a clip, every gesture for a meme. But beneath the laughter and noise, a strange undercurrent rippled. It showed on the faces of a few in the room who were old enough to remember Norris not as a meme, but as a man who had actually fought. A few journalists whispered to one another, unease replacing amusement. Within an hour, the first clips hit Twitter. By the end of the night, the laugh and the line, "Chuck Norris wouldn't last a minute," were trending worldwide. Memes appeared instantly. Side-by-side photos of the grinning champion and an older shot of Norris, stoic and sharp-eyed. Some celebrated the bravado, cheering the young man for killing the past. Others recoiled. "You don't know who you just called out," one user wrote. The post racked up thousands of likes. Another simply posted, "Careful. He hears everything." By morning, the internet had split in two. On one side, excitement, youth, the thrill of arrogance. On the other, respect, memory, and the quiet anger of those who didn't see Norris as a relic at all. And through it all, one thought grew heavier, whispered again and again in threads, in videos, in comments under news articles. He's not going to let that slide. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down. Bellow. For days, the city spoke louder than he ever needed to. Sports channels replayed the champion's laugh on a loop. His mocking line wouldn't last a minute, paired with highlight reels and ticker graphics bold enough to sting. Late-night hosts clipped the soundbite into their monologues, the studio audiences howling while his grin lit up giant screens. One morning, show even added a stopwatch graphic in the corner as they talked, the seconds ticking until the imagined end of Chuck Norris. Everywhere, his voice. Everywhere, his certainty. And everywhere, one absence. Chuck's. He said nothing. No interviews, no denials, no counter-challenge. The silence spread across the noise like a shadow. For the young champion, it was oxygen. He smirked into phone cameras, flashing his belt like jewelry. In one hotel elevator selfie, he typed a caption as careless as it was sharp. Still waiting. His fans swarmed, filling the comments with stopwatch emojis, a shorthand for humiliation. The number 60 became their symbol, their inside joke, their prophecy. But below the noise, another current began to flow. Accounts without filters, without blue checks or hashtags, posted messages stripped of decoration. Just a sentence, sometimes a single word. He hears. He doesn't post. Walk carefully. They weren't threats. They weren't arguments. They were reminders, quiet enough to cut through the volume. Talk radio wrestled with the gap. Analysts broke down Chuck's age, comparing it to statistics, measuring reaction time against biology. Time wins every fight, one host said. But another cut in, more hesitant. Maybe. But tell me, the last time you saw him flinch. They played clips side by side. Seagulls sweating under flashing lights, fists like hammers. Chuck in a dim gym, mitts popping, face still. The contrast wasn't flattering. It was haunting. The champion leaned into the joke. He went live on Instagram from a rooftop, neon bleeding across the skyline. Maybe he's still on a movie set, he laughed. Maybe he's teaching karate to extras. His grin was contagious. The hearts flooded up the screen. He signed off with a wink and a dare. Any ring, any night. Let him choose. And then the first grainy clip appeared. 10 seconds. No watermark. A shadow inside a gym lit by square windows. A man moving through combinations, fluid, patient, while a coach's voice counted numbers just out of reach. No words, no location. Only a caption. He's watching. It spread differently than the memes. Not like fire, but like water through cracks. Quiet reposts. No hashtags, no noise. People sent it to each other in private chats. Typed nothing, just the clip. Soon, there were more. A bench with worn tape marks where names had been etched and torn away. A pair of shoes placed neatly at the edge of a mat. A heavy bag swaying. No one in frame. Same caption every time. He's watching. By the third day, producers were sending interns to chase rumors. One of them staked out a cinder-block gym in Texas, the kind of place that smelled of dust and leather. She filmed her sneakers, the cracked sidewalk, the heat wobbling in the air. And then, near dusk, the door rolled up. Chuck stepped into the rectangle of light. Plain shirt, hands taped. No entourage, no announcement. Just a man walking from one room into another. The cameras swarmed, voices tripping over one another. Is the challenge real? Do you accept? Anything to say to the champion? He didn't push through them. He didn't posture. He just walked, the same pace as always. At the last camera, blocked in his path, he stopped. His eyes lifted, caught the lens. His voice was quiet, each word deliberate. "Some think strength is loud words," he said. "I think strength is truth. We'll test it soon." 8 seconds. That was all. He walked on, the door slamming shut with the echo of finality. The clip ran everywhere by nightfall. Anchors repeated it, panelists dissected it, podcasters tried to twist it into sound bites. The young champion, watching from a studio couch, laughed and posted himself tapping his wristwatch. Tick-tock. His fans roared. But something was different. The silence between Chuck's words weighed more than the words themselves. People didn't just replay the clip. They replayed the pause. The following evening, another video surfaced. Chuck again, in that same gym. No music, no crowd. His fists landed on mitts, crisp and quiet. At the end of the round, he unwrapped his hands, adjusted the posture of a teenage student, and bowed. Before the clip cut, he glanced toward the camera, not into it, through it, and said, "We test truth soon." The phrase wasn't a boast. It was a schedule. By the next morning, Las Vegas billboards carried his image without sponsors or slogans. Just white letters on black, soon. Drivers honked for no reason. Passengers snapped photos. The champion doubled down. On a talk show couch, he shadowboxed between jokes, smiling at the audience as he promised to respect his elders. Laughter rolled. The host joined in. But in homes and bars, people shook their heads. They weren't laughing anymore. Because the silence wasn't absence now. It was presence. It pressed down on every word the champion spoke, every smile he forced, every joke he cracked. Everyone knew. Chuck had answered. And when he answered, the conversation always changed. The ballroom of the Los Angeles Arena had never felt like this before. It was supposed to be a charity night. Gloved exhibitions, speeches, a few polite rounds between professionals who knew they were on stage to entertain, not to fight. Sponsors had set tables with linen. Cameras were stationed in predictable corners, and the organizers expected a polite crowd with cocktails in hand. But when the announcer stepped into the ring, the air shifted. Every guest in the room knew the story that had been building for weeks. This wasn't just an exhibition anymore. The laughter from the press conference, the silence that followed, the promise of soon, it had all condensed into this one night. The young champion entered first, music pounding through the speakers. His entrance was a performance. Bright lights tracing his outline, his smile wide, his hands raised as though the fight was already won. He twirled his gloves like toys, leaned over the ropes to grin at the nearest camera, and tossed a wink toward the crowd. A few laughed, some cheered, but an undercurrent of disapproval ran through the room. The chant that rose wasn't applause. It was a rumble of boos laced with sharp whistles. He didn't care. He played into it, cupping his ear, shouting, "Where's our legend?" Don't tell me he overslept. The joke landed with half the room, but the other half sat stone-faced. Then the lights cut. Not dimmed. Cut. The music fell silent. The crowd murmured, shifting in their seats. And from the far end of the room, with no fanfare, Chuck walked out. No spotlight followed him. No drums or flashing screens marked his steps. He came in plain white GI pants, a simple jacket tied loosely, hands bare, his posture straight. The crowd erupted. Not the chaotic roar that had greeted the young champion's theatrics, but a sound that rolled up from the floor to the rafters, steady, heavy, unanimous. People rose from their seats, some clapping, some simply standing in silence, the kind of silence that carries weight. Chuck didn't wave. He didn't acknowledge the noise. He walked, eyes fixed forward, and climbed into the ring with the same care as someone stepping onto a mat in a small dojo. Across from him, the young champion smirked. He tried to drown out the moment, to remind everyone whose night this was. "You made it," he said loudly, microphone still dangling from a ring hand nearby. "Not bad, old man. You didn't get lost on the way here?" Chuck finally looked at him. His face was unreadable, his eyes calm. His reply was simple, almost soft. "I always arrive on time." The room stilled. No insult, no escalation, just truth, delivered without hesitation. It cut sharper than any comeback could have. Even the commentators at ringside fumbled for words, caught between nervous laughter and the awareness that something had shifted. The referee, sensing the tension, hurried to center them. He explained the rules of the exhibition. Light contact, no scoring, respect above all. The crowd listened, but nobody truly believed this was going to be light contact. Not anymore. The two men faced each other, gloves touching. The champion leaned close, his grin tight, and whispered something the microphones couldn't catch. Chuck didn't answer. He simply met his eyes, still and unwavering. For a moment, the younger man's grin faltered. Around them, the crowd's energy changed. It was no longer noise. It was pressure, thick and expectant. Phones rose into the air, hundreds of tiny red lights recording. The air smelled of cologne, sweat, and anticipation. Someone in the front row muttered, "This isn't charity anymore." The referee stepped back, raised his arm, and glanced at both fighters. His lips moved around the word that signaled everything. The crowd held its breath. The hand dropped. And in that instant, every person in the arena understood. This wasn't going to be a performance. This was going to be a reckoning. The bell rang like a coin on glass, clean, thin, impossible to ignore. The arena inhaled and did not exhale. Even the cameras seemed to hold still, their red dots steady as pupils. On the canvas, chalk dust rose from a corner someone had swept badly, hanging in the lights like mist. The referee's hand cut away, and the first second fell. The young champion moved first, too fast for the floor to creak under him. He didn't test distance with a lazy jab or circle to read the rhythm. He stepped straight into range and tore at it. Jab, cross, hook, another hook. Each punch thrown like a promise he intended to keep right now. Leather tapped and thudded against forearm and glove, a staccato that bounced off the rafters. His fans answered in kind, their voices collapsing into a single wordless shout. Somewhere in the lower rows, a man counted aloud, trying to be a clock. Chuck didn't mirror him. He gave him a target that kept changing size. Half steps, a slip that was more shoulder than head, a small tilt that turned a heavy glove into a graze. He parried with the front of his knuckles like he was calming a door that wanted to slam. When contact landed, it landed on places that could take it. Bicep, guard, the outside of a shoulder that rolled with the blow and passed it along. His breath barely made sound. The champion's breath sounded like a train opening and closing its doors. The second hand on the ring clock clicked. A chorus of phones held high tilted as one to track the chase. The champion drove him toward a neutral corner, feinting high to bring the guard up and ripping at the body with a short shovel hook that touched elbow instead of rib. He tried to grab momentum with both hands and came away with sweat. Nothing in his face broke, but his pupils flared almost imperceptibly, surprise registering and getting buried. Chuck's economy made the space louder. He gave nothing extra. No flinch, no theatrical roll, no attempt to win the room with a flourish. His feet traced neat triangles. His eyes stayed on the center line, not the gloves. He wasn't reacting to the hands. He was reading the hips that sent them. The crowd split along an invisible seam. On the right side of the ring, where the champion's team had friends and comped seats, A chant tried to form and broke into cheers instead. Opposite, a different rhythm gathered, slower, more deliberate. Chuck, chuck. 2 beats and a breath. 2 beats and a breath. Like a metronome someone wound by hand. The competing noises braided into something electric, a voltage that made skin prickle. The champion heard it and pushed harder, mistaking volume for opportunity. He stepped in with a stiff jab designed as a battering ram, not a question. Chuck let the glove brush his cheekbone, not with bravado, but because that half-inch put his own weight where he wanted it. A left hook came next, short and hot, meant to catch him during the turn. He wasn't there for it. The glove found the space where his head had been and yanked air instead. He tried legs, a tap of the lead foot, then a quick outside step to set an angle for the right hand. His shoulder twitched the tell. The hip loaded the story. And for a heartbeat, the picture looked perfect. Young against old, speed against patience, power building at the hinge of the body. People leaned forward, napkins falling off knees, drinks stranded halfway to mouths. Chuck's answer was boring enough to be devastating. He reset the line. One small pivot. Weight from heel to ball. The champion's door slammed on its own momentum and opened to a hallway with no end. Another flurry. 3 punches this time, then a 4th added because sometimes adding is easier than thinking. The 3rd caught guard, the 4th scraped glove. The sound of it, pop, pop, skirt, was made for clips. But the ring doesn't pay sound. It taxes mistakes. By the 3rd minute's first 30 seconds, sweat slicked the champion's back into a sheen the lights loved. His mouth opened wider between combinations. A corner voice shouted, "Touch the body!" And he tried, folding at the waist for leverage, firing a hook he'd drilled 1,000 times. He wanted to feel something give. He got forearm again. Chuck's own corner said almost nothing. A single syllable here. Line. A number there. 2. As if the advice were already in him and just needed a tap to rise. The champion stepped off, reset his feet, shook out his shoulders like he could shake off geometry. He bounced, trying to make the canvas spring him forward, and feinted high twice. Chuck didn't bite either time, not frozen, just uninterested. Noise swelled. The chant found a spine. "Chuck! Chuck!" It wasn't louder than the champion's side so much as more certain. The difference bothered him. He threw a hard jab and finally felt knuckles land, snug on cheekbone, enough to draw a red bloom that the front row would later swear was a cut. It wasn't. He followed with a left to the body that thudded honest on meat. Relief lit his eyes for a flash. Chuck gave him the smallest acknowledgement of the night. A blink, maybe, or the ghost of a nod that said, "Noted." It helped nothing. Frustration shifted into urgency. The champion widened his stance, right heel grinding for purchase, left hand pawing a measure he didn't need. He stepped to his left to line up the right hand, the one his people wanted, the one the crowd expected, the one he had told cameras would teach the old man about minutes and clocks. He drew a breath that sounded like a hinge and went. Every muscle in his arm wrote the note in capital letters. Shoulder turned, hip followed, foot dug. The punch carved the lane he'd designed, perfect to the eye, heavy enough to satisfy anyone watching for statements. Chuck's head slipped a thumb's width outside the line. The glove sailed by, the air it took with it cooling the sweat on Chuck's ear. He didn't reach back with a hook. He didn't spin. He didn't advertise. He let the miss carry the champion too far. Let gravity and intent pull him into a space he hadn't planned to be. And in that space, Chuck placed the first answer of the night. A jab to the body. Short. Clean. No wind-up, no message, just the exact amount of travel needed to put leather flat under the ribs, off-center enough to steal breath without drama. It landed like a sentence with no adjectives. The champion's face didn't register pain so much as interruption. His step hit a pause where there was supposed to be a comma. Air stalled. His right hand was suddenly both too far away and in the way. The room heard it. Not the smack of glove, body shots hide from microphones, but the reaction. A collective "oh" that started in the lower rows and climbed. Hands that had been recording wobbled and steadied. The chant snapped into clarity. "Chuck! Chuck!" The word wasn't adoration. It was diagnosis. The champion backed half a step without meaning to. He recovered. Yes, chin down, elbows in, pride patched over the hole. But the draft of doubt that had slid in with that jab didn't leave. He circled to his right to hide it, trying to make the movement look like a plan. The ref's eyes flicked, counting distance, measuring himself into irrelevance again. It wasn't a knockdown. It wasn't even a combination. It was a plain truth, placed exactly where it would be read. Around the ring, faces changed in small ways, the micro shifts that make a crowd feel like it's turned all at once. People who had come to laugh shut their mouths. People who had come to film started watching. Somewhere near the aisle, a boy in a replica jacket lowered his phone 2 inches, as if the lens might miss the point. The champion reset his gloves against his cheekbones and rolled his shoulders, trying to look like a man unbothered by punctuation. He flicked a jab to show he could. He bounced in place to show he still owned his legs. He smiled without teeth. Across from him, the older man did nothing you could clip. He breathed in, breathed out, and let the room understand what it had just seen. Not damage, but direction. The bell had started a fight. The jab had started a conversation. And for the first time all night, the question hanging over the canvas wasn't how long can he last. It was quieter, heavier. Who just set the clock? The round resumed heavier than it began. The young champion bounced once, twice, trying to summon the swagger that had carried him through so many nights. But the smile was gone. His jaw was locked, his eyes sharp with something that looked more like doubt than fire. "You're too slow," he barked, loud enough for the front rows. He wanted the words to sting, to make the crowd laugh, to put Chuck back into the role of a relic. Some fans echoed his shout, but their voices felt scattered, uncertain. Chuck gave him nothing. No smirk, no jab of his own. Just silence. The kind that made words shrink in the air as though they didn't belong there at all. The champion forced action. He rushed forward, throwing a tight combination, jab, cross, hook, another hook to the ribs. It looked crisp, but Chuck's guard absorbed the impact, his shoulders rolling with the blows. Each shot that should have landed clean was swallowed by economy. By the time the flurry ended, the champion was breathing harder, and Chuck hadn't budged. The crowd began to shift. The jeers thinned, replaced by the slow murmur of something new. Respect. People leaned forward in their seats, some starting to clap whenever Chuck slipped a punch or parried with barely a twitch. Phones hovered in the air, red lights blinking, every second documented. "Too slow!" the champion shouted again, trying to own the silence. He crowded Chuck into a clinch, digging at the ribs with a free hand. The referee shoved in to separate them, and on the break, the younger man snuck in a punch half a beat late. It landed, but Chuck's face never changed. He stepped back to the center, gloves steady, eyes calm. It rattled the room more than the punch. The champion pressed harder, his own corner yelling, "Keep the pressure!" He unleashed another 5-punch sequence. The first two caught Chuck's guard, the third cut air, the fourth barely grazed, and the last missed entirely. In reply, Chuck slid a jab straight to the body. Short, simple, not meant for the highlight reel. It landed flush under the ribs, and the young man froze for a fraction of a second. The crowd gasped as one, a sound closer to shock than celebration. The champion's knees didn't give, but his eyes betrayed him. Wide, startled, the mask cracked. For the first time all night, he looked less like the man who laughed into a microphone and more like someone realizing he had stepped into deeper water. Chuck didn't follow up with violence. He just waited, gloves still, balance perfect, as if giving the younger man a chance to process the truth. The silence inside the ring began to press on the crowd. Then, as though on cue, voices rose. Chuck! Chuck! The chant rolled across the arena, steady and relentless. Even those who had booed before found themselves drawn in, clapping, shouting, pulled by the gravity of the moment. The champion tried to answer with defiance. He whipped a hard hook, but his foot placement was off. The punch sailed wide, and in that instant, Chuck's right hand came across like a carpenter's chalk line, clean, straight, undeniable. The glove caught the chin square, snapping the head a half-inch, not dramatic, but unmistakable. The room went still, not loud silence, not tense anticipation, pure stillness, as if the crowd had forgotten how to breathe. The champion stumbled half a step, then recovered. But the look in his eyes was no longer the look of a hunter. It was the look of someone trying not to show he'd just been shaken. Phones tilted down to capture replays, comments exploded across live streams, but in the ring there was only one truth. The tide had turned. The bell ended the stretch. The champion staggered toward his corner, chest rising too fast, ignoring water until his coach forced the bottle into his glove. His face was pale under the lights, his eyes avoiding the man across from him. Chuck remained standing, leaning lightly against the ropes, breathing even, his gaze steady as if the fight hadn't yet begun for him at all. And as the crowd's chant swelled again, one fact became impossible to deny. The young champion's arrogance was breaking. The final round began under a weight that pressed on every chest in the arena. Coaches had vanished to their corners, stools were gone, and the air buzzed with the sound of thousands holding their breath at once. The referee glanced at each fighter, one pale, tight-jawed, the other calm, unreadable, and dropped his hand. The bell cut through the room like glass breaking. The young champion lunged immediately, desperate to prove that the night still belonged to him. His punches came in flurries, fast, violent, heavy. The thuds of leather echoed like small explosions. He tried to overwhelm Chuck, to bury him beneath youth and fury. His fans screamed encouragement, their voices sharp and frantic. But Chuck didn't fight the storm. He turned, rolled, and let the gloves glance off shoulders and arms. He moved with economy, conserving space, never out of balance. Where the younger man's breaths grew ragged, Chuck's came steady, measured. He didn't chase or retreat. He waited. The crowd fractured, and then united again. Chants began to rise. Chuck! Chuck! They weren't taunts. They sounded like recognition, like the crowd had chosen patience over chaos. The champion tried to break it with words. Too slow, he spat, shoving into a clinch, driving short punches into ribs. The referee wedged between them, and on the break, the young fighter threw a sneaky right hand that clipped clean. It landed, but Chuck's expression never changed. He simply reset, gloves steady, eyes clear. That rattled the crowd more than the punch itself. The champion grew frantic. He threw a 5-punch combination, each strike wilder than the last. Only the last one came close, and Chuck's counter was as short as it was precise. A jab to the body that knocked the air from his opponent's lungs. For a heartbeat, the young man froze. Gasps filled the arena. Then came the mistake. He loaded up a wide left hook, weight spilling over, right hand dropping low. Chuck's answer was immediate. A cross delivered without effort or noise. It landed square on the chin, sharp as a nail striking wood. The champion's knees dipped, his eyes widened, and for a fraction of a second, he looked lost. He didn't fall, but everyone saw the shift. The mask of arrogance cracking, fear leaking through. The arena went still. Not roaring silence, but true stillness. The kind that makes the skin prickle. The referee hovered, ready, but Chuck didn't rush. He waited, gloves calm, giving the younger man the dignity of standing. When the fight resumed, the champion swung again, desperate, but his punches were slower, sloppier. Chuck guided the ring now. A feint here, a touch to the ribs there, reminders that the fight was already decided. The chant grew heavier. Chuck! Chuck! Phones lit the crowd like a sky of red stars. Even those who had booed earlier clapped now, unable to resist the gravity of what they were watching. And then it ended, not with a collapse, but with clarity. The champion lunged forward one last time, throwing everything he had left. Chuck stepped aside, half a foot, and caught him by the shoulder before he could stumble past. The referee waved it off. Enough. The bell followed like punctuation. The crowd erupted. Chuck didn't celebrate. He turned the younger man toward him, leaned close, and spoke into the mic without raising his voice. True strength isn't in laughing. True strength is respect. And tonight, you learned that the words fell like stones into a lake. The champion's head dropped. For the first time all night, he had no answer. Applause shook the walls. Not wild celebration, but deep, unanimous approval. Chuck stood still, absorbing none of it, while the young man bowed under the weight of silence that was louder than any cheer. His laughter had filled microphones a week ago, but the quiet that followed Chuck's words was louder than any knockout, and it lingered long after the bell stopped ringing.